Fianza spoken by young and old, rich and poor, Democrat and Republican, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, gay, straight, disabled and not disabled, Americans who sent a message to the world that we have never been just a collection of individuals or a collection of red states and blue states. We are and always will be the United States of America.
Well, the real significance, in my opinion, of this last election of President Obama is that it created a sea change in American politics for various reasons. One of them being the obvious one, that here's the first Afro-American elected as president, which most people thought would never happen. Even the black community thought that it would never happen in their lifetime. But the other thing is the way the campaign was conducted, namely as an internet event rather than an advertising on television and lawn signs and speeches from the backs of trains and all that kind of stuff. It was an internet event in which he put together 50 million, I think it is, subscribers to his internet story, and they in turn worked as volunteer workers and enlisted thousands of others. So he had already a base of millions that were on his side, and most of them were young. Most of them, or many of them, had never voted before because they were just now becoming voting age. The success of any portrait is how much data you've got to work with. In the case of Obama, I've bought a number of albums and cut pictures out of Time magazine, that sort of thing, to get as much data as I can to work from. And I pasted them on boards like this and refer back and forth to that. There isn't a single photograph that was exactly what I was looking for that I have found. The look I wanted is basically serious but pleasant, no grinning, just a faint smile on his lips, and the eyes looking sort of sincere and expressive. So everything is done from photographs. Someday I might arrange, he might arrange that I could come to the White House and photograph him myself like I did President Bush Sr. But there's not time for that now. I have to get this done pretty quickly. After I made the clay original life-size, I cast a plaster version of it, or maybe two, in case one of them gets ruined. And on that one, I start marking horizontal lines every ½ inch, horizontal to the floor, parallel to the floor. And I use a laser leveler. Then I do a vertical laser line down the middle of the nose, the back of the head, right side, left side, because getting an exact square that the original model is on is very important, because 12 years ago when I was first doing the president's head, I constructed this box, which I call a computer. It's not a computer at all, made of wood, and it's little shelves and brass pins that touch various points on the head. And it's such that I can put the model in there and then lift it up an inch and up an inch and up an inch by changing the base, the floor that it's sitting on. Because the top where the pins are that touch have to be always in the same place. So I get basically one line touched in many places by these brass pins, and I trace that. Then to give a bit more accuracy to that contour, I will use the contour gauge, which is a little device with about 100 or so little parallel wires in it that can move, that can get a contour. You can touch anything and get that shape. I use that to enhance the other one, you might say, to get a little bit more detail in each cut. The analogy for this whole thing is a little bit like cutting a green pepper up for salad. If you cut a green pepper up and have all these rings, and you increase the dimension of the ring times 10 times the thickness, and put them back together again, you'd have a bell pepper exactly 10 times bigger. So that's the analogy of how this ring system works. All these points are to get those rings out of styrofoam, which I glue to the box and make the big model from that. The square represents the wooden box that I'm gluing all these styrofoams to. So when I cut out the foam, I just cut out the pieces that'll go to the box, but not the box itself. I'm doing layer number 16 now. And then from the same drawing, I'm going to cut off 16 to make 18, which is a smaller one, because it's getting near the top of his head. 16L and 16 front. B and 16F. I can tell that's where his hairline leaves the forehead from his temple. And up here is the other side. Once I project that overall shape, I cut it out with a hot knife and then do the next one and the next one and the next one. And then when all these shapes are cut out of 2-inch styrofoam, they're stacked up one on top of the other, and that gives the overall general shape of the big head. I'm going to cut these. The best thing is a hot knife, it's called. And what it is, it's a blade, it's electrically heated, and there's a trigger on the hot knife itself. When you pull it on, that blade heats up, and that blade will just slide through styrofoam, so it's cutting it by heat. So cutting with heat is the easiest or most accurate way to cut foam. So I use this hot knife to carve out these shapes. It's just quicker and smoother than a knife. Or I've used saws. I've used all kinds of little thin saws, but a hot knife is better. Number 15, that must be this one. Right, 15, right. I thought so. See why it pays to put numbers on these things. the thing and start scraping. So that's essentially the way I get the big, full-size, roughed-in model. And it's a very roughed-in model because cutting of that foam is anything but perfect. But that does give me the scale. That gives me how big, how wide. And from that, I start doing all the work on that, which is cutting and trimming, adding on plaster, adding on clay eventually. I use also bamboo skewers to attach them to each other by going up through a bunch of them or crosswise through a bunch of them so they don't shift. And then where the front meets the back, I use them horizontally to sort of clamp everything together with the bamboo skewers. So it's the glue, which is actually just silicone caulking tube glue. I don't use glue like Elmer's glue. I use caulking as a glue. And then the bamboo skewers reinforce that caulking. Arthritis is acting up in my back hip now. His arthritis is prone to do. I'm sort of a workaholic. I came from a background of very small town Texas Protestant background where in college I had 2 jobs, that kind of stuff. So I'm from that generation where you're supposed to work more than play. I think play is looked upon a little bit as sinful. I'm not a Baptist, but that was just my whole family background. And there's 2 kinds of work for me. Thinking about what I'm going to do next or trying to create new ideas and actually being up there physically doing it. When I cut the big 2-inch styrofoam pieces, I use a hot knife, an electric knife, and it cuts them pretty much horizontal. I mean, I can slant them, but you never can anticipate exactly which way the slant should go. So they're big, so you just cut them pretty much the easiest way. Then when you put them up on top, you'll see that an angle, like the nose, will be a stair step because you can't cut them exactly at the right angle so that when they stack up, they become what you're looking for. Therefore, it makes more sense on the overall profile to cut one piece that's the profile only. That's a big vertical piece that goes down and glues to the box. And then make all these side pieces fit that one rather than depending on the accuracy of cutting them the other way. So that's why I cut that 2-inch piece that profiles right down the middle of his nose and down the middle of his back so that all those pieces can conform to that. So that profile overrides, it trumps all the other cutting as far as getting that profile is concerned. When the foam is put together and held together with skewers and glue, there are always going to be gaps that it didn't fit quite right, or the angle on the cut is going to be such that it leaves a gap. So I just cut little pieces of foam and just jam them in there, and to fill in everywhere, so that when I put the final clay over it, the holes are filled. It's just a way of filling in little gaps, kind of like a hole in the wall. You'd put a mastic or putty or something over it. Starting to shape his lips. The mixture that goes over this original foam is kind of a mixture that, it's kind of a clay, but it's made of joint compound and concrete. But it's kind of heavy, and if I need a large volume of it, I mix in ground up styrofoam, which we call bolitas here. They're just little tiny round balls of styrofoam. And that gives a lighter weight and a bigger volume to that. If I'm adding on hair or where I need a lot, I use the bolitas. When this stuff falls and hits the ground, it sounds an awful lot like life on the farm in the cow pasture. I'm going to tell you what, I'm just going to let you guess. And I cut everything off of them that does not look like Obama. And what's left, I stack them up. And it doesn't look like Obama then even. So it takes a lot of this stuff and getting back and looking at it, and adding on, cutting off, chipping off, adding on, chipping off, adding on. Finally, you get it. It takes a long time. After the special mixture with the bolitas is in, to give volume and lightweight, the final refine step is to use the same special mixture, which is quick drying and easy to correct. Then that's applied with spatulas, both the flat ones and the curved ones, to cover the whole surface with the final coat. I'm going to take this ear off. It's just too small. I measured a replacement for it that's considerably larger. Also, doing a Van Gogh on this guy, where I just basically cut this ear. Okay. When the first head is in the rough, it's all rough. So to get the ears proportionate to where they are, I just cut out a flat piece and pin them up there with bamboo skewers. Then later I take those off and cut out a complete ear and work it with clay and everything else to have the final ear on the final blow up, which is the final sign-off copy to make the rubber mold from. Whereas on Obama, I've got several hundred photographs. And unfortunately, they're taken at different distances with different lenses, different light conditions. And all of them can, I mean, they can contradict each other. I can see a picture of his left ear on one, and on another one, it does not look like the same ear because just that slight difference in angle and light gives it a different shape. Ideally, if I had taken my own photographs, he'd pose for me. I would take photographs every 5 degrees around his head, looking down on him, looking up at him. All the possible details I could get in my own photographs would be the best data I could use because they would have been taken with one camera under one light condition and not having to juggle all the various things. So it's been a challenge because there's so much data and it's not consistent. And there's so many people that know what he looks like. So there's a big audience that has to be convinced that this is a good piece of work. It's only taking off an 1/8 of an inch, but it's important. My daughter loved that one when she was 6 years old. We were skiing in California, and there was a German gal there, and she asked that, which do you prefer, a turtleneck or a henway? And the German girl says, what's a turtleneck? And Bobo was silenced. That wasn't the answer she was looking for. What's a turtleneck? These bread knives, $8 knives, I buy them in the 99-cent store. Kind of without rhyme or reason. This is the hardest part in the whole thing, getting the eyes. Okay, this is gonna hurt, Mama, but something that looks a little bit more like eyes. Because you can't get too much detail out of one part when the other part is unresolved. So I'm going to go up there and work on that right now. One of the biggest problems is symmetry, of having the same amount of depth, so that when you do a cross section, you don't have a cheek that's fatter than the other one. It's all a question of depth perception, because it's not an obvious problem. When this thing finally starts shaping up, then all the fine tuning will start. I'll take off an 1/8 of an inch there and add on a 1/16 of an inch over here. Back and forth, and that's to finally get a sign-off version. But I can't get there till I get all this stuff on. Tempted to hammer that or do something. What this is for is to put a coat on the foam itself so it will accept clay. It's hard to get the clay to stick on styrofoam. That actually kind of melts. What I'm doing, I'm going to try to apply clay to the whole eye. So I can have something in detail to paint on. And clay has a hard time sticking to foam. It's kind of a slow process, but it goes pretty quick. Crazy weather, Robert. after the special mixture with the bolitas is in to give volume and lightweight, the final refine step is to use the same special mixture, which is quick drying and easy to correct. Then that's applied with spatulas, both the flat ones and the curved ones, to cover the whole surface with the final coat. To get the final detail, I use plastiline clay, which is commercial sculptor's clay, for the eyebrows and the eyes and places where it takes some really fine carving. But that's a different color than the mixture. So I'll paint them both a unified color so that when you get back and look at it, you don't see all the blotches. You see a unified surface. And that's the only way you can really get a final look at it to see if it's complete or not. Okay, what I'm going to do now is measure from the center of the nose how far out the eyes are, and they should be the same. Some people are not, but most people are the same, and symmetry is better than the non-symmetry. At the same time, I'm going to measure the end of the eyes to see how they work out. And maybe even something like, that's where the eyeball hits the muscle in there. Yeah, see that? See, that one was not parallel. So it really needs to be more like that. Yeah, 6 1/4. 6 1/4. 14. 14, that's about right. So, looks like the inside edge of this eye needs to be moved out a little bit, but the centers are not too bad. This is the stage now where you down to the 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch of dimensions and of thickness and all the rest. When it's crude, it's like 1 inch matters, you know, this, or 2 inches or something. Then you get down to 1/4 inch, then finally at the end you're down to 1/16 of an inch, or even less, where moving something a little bit or adding on a little bit is what it takes to finally finish it. And you're finished when you can't see anything else to do to it to improve it. That's when it's finished. Or in some cases, when the truck is there to haul it away, that's when it's finished. In the case of the Sam Houston in Huntsville, it was finished on a Friday night because the dedication was Saturday morning. Finished or not, it's finished. And it wasn't actually, but it was as far as everybody else but me was concerned. I'm going to bring some of that batch. I need about 1 inch right there, and then it flattens out later. I don't quite have that curve yet. So I'm going to attempt to get that curve. If that's the shape I'm looking for. This makes me look. Nothing is right until it's all right. You have to, as it comes together, little problems start solving themselves at the same time. And you can't really be sure of anything until it starts really finishing. Probably also put some along this whole lower eyeball. It just looks too, not nearly enough volume on it, not enough shape. I looked at all my other statues yesterday to see how their eyes are. Man, some of them got great bulges, ins and outs, and give it a lot of character. And his eyes need more character in my version of them. They don't have the character that some other people do, but I want to give him some. That's my contribution to world affairs. If you take an old beat up bicycle and use the wheels for something else, is that really recycling in every sense of the word? I ask you, it's an academic question that doesn't require a considered answer. But if you choose to answer that, I shall be forever grateful. A little bit of lip gloss. And to think this model will be destroyed in 10 minutes after it's served its purpose. It takes weeks, days to do, and it's destroyed. It's like blowing up a building that took years to build, since it no longer serves its purpose. The ears produce a lot of problems with back cutting there. So it's easier just to do the ears separately, to cut them off the original model, cast them separately, and when they're cast and the concrete big one is put together, those ears are added in the holes that are left in the original mold. So the ears are a little bit more complicated. The shape of them, there are a lot of ins and outs, which doesn't exist on most of the face. think that that's to give the true color, but that's not it at all. It's to give a surface that will let me put clay on it. Yeah, I'll try the back. Here's our us. Here's where you wait. President Obama's hair is very short and very unlike any other president. So first I had to get the shape of his head, sort of an egg shape, and get that right, but a little bit undersized, like an inch or so short of what it should be. Then to do the hair, I put on about an inch of the special mixture with the bolitas in it to get the thickness of it. And then when that was dry, then another coat about a quarter of an inch of the mixture without the bolitas. It's a combination of drywall paste and concrete and silicone powder ground up to give us a stuff that can be applied and it can be carved easily. And you have a window of 24 hours of sort of carve on it. So it was a way to get a coat on there and then with a little spatula go in and carve all those little niches. Whereas plastiline clay, to carve it would take 10 times the time to do something like that. That would have taken weeks to do his head in plastiline. Like icing a hair cake. I'm scraping on that, trying to remove everything that does not look like Obama. And as that's going on, it seems endless. There's an awful lot of that to be doing. While I'm doing this, Chewy, in the meantime, is building the shoulders. And that's consisting of making a steel armature, or you might say a skeleton for the shoulders. All right, after the model is completely covered in plastiline clay, there's a lot of smoothing out to be done. And everybody gets involved in that because it's basically just with your hands and thumbs smoothing out all this clay. So we all do that. My guys will put on some clay and I'll see it's a little bit too much, so I'll take it off. And then I'll add on a little bit more, and then they'll add on more. So it's a give and take, going from here to here to here to here to here to here to here. And that's all you can do to it. And finally, at the very end, when it's almost finished, a change of a 1/16 of an inch might be the difference between the twinkle in the eye or the angle or the touch of the smile or something that gives it the expression. The real expression comes at the very end when there are those tiny incremental changes that make just the turning of the lips up a little bit or something in the eyes. So that's the final signed-off version is when you make those tiny incremental changes. An analogy might be with a novelist that's written his novel, and now he's read it for the third time, and he doesn't see a single word that he can change, and that's it. You sign off on that, and that's it. And it's a great feeling of relief, of course, and having accomplished and ready to go take a nap. The next step is building the rubber mold on top of the final version in clay. And to make the rubber separate easy from the clay itself, we will put a fine coating of grease on there. That could be painted on with a brush in a liquid form, and then it's kind of rubbed to even it out. Then the silicone is applied on top of that. The grease serves again as to facilitate the separating, the pulling of the rubber off of the clay mold. So we use clear for the first coat. Then after that, we'll go to white, which is a little bit stronger than clear. Not much. We could do it all in clear, but we buy clear and white we use on the second coat after the clear is already there and done. And it's established that it's pretty much everywhere where it's supposed to be. For the rubber mold to have any strength at all, so it won't tear and whatnot, we apply open weave fiberglass mesh. And we apply that in the second coat of the silicone. The first one is to get all the details. When that's established, then we can start applying the mesh directly into the second coat or the third coat. Usually about 3 coats is all we put on there. And sometimes double mesh, sometimes single mesh. It kind of depends on where the pressure is going to be in a certain area. And then when that's done, we go through the process of applying the plaster for the mother mold. The Obama statue, a couple of days ago I started thinking, what percentage of my adult life am I spending on this statue? You know, it seemed like more and more. Or better put, of the productive years I have left, what percentage of those are spent on this particular work? And I would like to have finished it a month ago, but the thing about sculpture, a sculpture is never finished until it's taken away from you, or it's sold, or it's out of your presence, or you're dead, or you can't get back to it. There's always more to do on sculpture. Painting is not that way. Painting, you can finish a painting and then you don't know what more to do to it, and it pretty much stays that way forever. You can come back 20 years later, as Chagall did a lot, and Picasso, and rework it. But by and large, a painting is a done deal. Sculpture, it's never a done deal. Even when it's cast in bronze and patinaed or polished, the polish will need redoing again later and that kind of stuff. So that's the problem. So he's just about finished now, but I know that when he's cast in concrete, I'm going to see stuff, God, I wish I'd changed that ear a little bit or something like that. But that's the nature of the beast, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'd like to say parenthetically that the Daniel French sculpture of Lincoln and the Lincoln Memorial is probably the most perfect piece that I've ever seen. When we did all the president's heads, we had a problem with the rubber mold itself once it's placed back in the mother mold from whence it came, and to start pouring in the cement, that it would start slipping a little bit, and we were getting distortions where it would slip and the rubber would curl up a little bit, and so we had to find a way to keep the rubber really in its place so it wouldn't slip. So Chewy came up with the idea that if we attached foam rubber piping to the rubber mold, and then when the plaster mother mold was made over that, the foam wouldn't slip. It would, so it's a method of keeping the rubber mold itself from slipping down in the support mold. And so that served that purpose. Then after the rubber mold is made, a support mold has to be made, which is sometimes called the mother mold or the support mold or the nest mold. There are various words for it. But when the rubber is peeled off of the original, it's a floppy blanket of just rubber. It's got to go somewhere. So it goes into this mold that fits it like hand in glove. And when we pull that off, sometimes we'd struggle with it, that we would distort the rubber and even pull it off the original. And so we saw that we needed an easier way to separate the plaster from the rubber. So we decided to put napkins, just paper napkins, over there and paint those with liquid shortening, which is plain old lard, heated up, painted on with a brush. So it paints a coat over the rubber, which allows the plaster mother mold to separate easily. When the mother mold is made, of course, it has to be made in two pieces, two or more pieces, that can be pulled off the rubber mold, which is normally one big piece. And to guarantee the right place to pull those off, we draw a line around the head, usually before or after the ears, or right on the ears sometime, to create that separation point, so that to make it easy for the two halves to separate, we have to put some sort of fin system. Plastic cards will work. Playing cards will work. Anything that will stick. We cut a little slice with a razor blade in the rubber and stick these cards in there and line them up so that when the two plaster halves meet the card, they don't stick to each other. So then when we pull the cards out, the two plaster pieces don't really touch. They're separated by that width of the card. And the cards are not thick enough to cause any distortion when we put them back together. The ears produce a lot of problems with back cutting there. So it's easier just to do the ears separately, to cut them off the original model, cast them separately, and when they're cast and the concrete big one is put together, those ears are added in the holes that are left in the original mold. The support mold is made of plaster. Plaster hardens very quickly. You have a short window, 15 or 20 minutes maximum before plaster starts setting up. So it has to be made and applied very quickly. And it's just sort of slapped on and applied with spatulas. It's not done in coats per se. You can do this now and do that now and next and do this and then do that. So it's not a continuous process. But you have to just build up enough plaster into the mesh to make it strong enough. Sometimes there will be a bit more thickness than others, depending on where it is in the structure. Like on the sides where it's going to be pulled off, it might need to be stronger than, say, right across the middle of the forehead or the back of the head or something like that. So it's kind of designed to fulfill the needs of strength, because the plaster has to be firm and strength. It can't budge. And plaster has no intrinsic strength, so you have to do something to apply the plaster on to make it a strong structure. So that's where we bend pipe, conduit pipe, sometimes plumbing pipe. We'll bend around to contour, to match the contour of the face and the back of the head. And we will attach mesh to that and then apply plaster into that mesh, which is supported by these pipes. And that gives us a strong support mold. And the support mold has to really be strong, because if it separates like that, say that's the half of the face, if it's there and it does that, then that means the rubber mold is going to be distorted and the final product is going to be wider than it should be. So that distance across the top has to really be kept static. So sometimes we'll weld a rod across the top to keep that from separating. And then when the concrete is applied in the rubber mold, it should be pretty accurate.
¿De aquel lado?
De aquí mismo va. Vámonos de aquel lado.
It's pretty difficult to pull the rubber mold off the head because it doesn't want to come off. It's stuck there. That's the reason we have all those things to make an easy release. But once it's pulled off, the inside of the rubber mold has all kinds of stuff. It has grease and sometimes all kinds of things that will come off from the original, even part clay. So we have to take it out and really get it clean off. We spurt it with water, then we take little spatulas and anything we can take to really clean off everything to get down to the pure rubber itself. Because when we cast the concrete into that, we have to be dealing only with the concrete hitting rubber. If there's any debris in there, it's going to incorporate that debris and that'll ruin the surface. Ah, wow.
We got it.
Así es, pega de arriba.
Si quieres, vos. Va para arriba nada más.
Mira, queremos.
Se va a caer. Cuidado. Déjala que se caiga ahí en la mela. Pero pon la paleta. Pon la paleta. Una, dos, tres, cuidado con la cabeza. La pata.
Oye.
Vamos.
Plaster mold has been taken right off the rubber, so every little squiggle in the rubber is there in that plaster. So you have to get it in there and get it placed exactly right where it's supposed to be. Push down everywhere, even if there's some grit or dust in the plaster, and there always is because when you plaster always gives off little chips. If you leave that in there and then you pour on top of that, that's going to amount to a dent in the final product because the rubber mold has got a little rise in it, and that is the equivalent of a dent. It's, you know, that positive makes this negative. And so it's got to be extremely clean. Then you start washing in the cement to it. Okay, I have 4 guys working for me, my crew. Mainly it's Chewy. Well, I have 2 Chewies. Little Chewy, we call him little because he's shorter than Big Chewy. And he is basically the foreman. He oversees the others, buys the materials, and he's out running around doing all the stuff that has to be done outside the shop to deal with this project. The other Big Chewy is a welder and a terrific worker. There's nothing he can't do. Then there are 2 others that are basically helpers, Pedro and Carlos, and they basically help out, do a lot of the physical stuff like rubbing and sanding and carrying and that kind of thing. The first coat of cement is just straight cement, sort of a rich mixture, painted in with big wide brushes into the rubber mold itself. Then when that's hardened, a second coat goes in with some reinforcement, with some chopped fiberglass in there to give it strength. Then the third coat goes in, similar. Once enough concrete is in there, we start bending steel straps to fit the interior of the shape. And it's several of them that are put in there, and then others are in the other direction that are welded. What we're doing here is building basically a steel rib sort of cage sort of structure that will hold the concrete, because the concrete itself doesn't have a lot of strength in terms of what's holding it all together. So the metal and the metal lath and the fiberglass mesh and all that is all integral to making the skin strong enough to survive. Then, when we put the two halves together with the steel strapping in there, they meet approximately. But so we weld on something shaped like a U to both sides of the inside near the parting place so that we can go in there and weld a strap between those U's together. So that's the easy way to weld the two halves together from the inside once they're completed and put together.
¿La metemos adentro otra vez? Ahorita la limpiamos. Pero así bájela. No. No. Que quede bien mediadito. Donde decía, bájale poquito, cosas.
or after the concrete halves are poured and put together, there are going to be lots of little blemishes, little places that need hand work on. So it's a question of scraping off all that and applying sometimes a bit more cement into little crevices and whatnot. Then taking it outside and washing it down with hose and, to get the whole thing as clean as possible before painting. The two sides are now welded together and of the head, and they're hoisted to the ceiling with a chain hoist. And then we build the shoulders from the ground to match the neck. We do that at the collar line so it doesn't show.
Va a querer nomás poquito.
And then we wire on expanded metal lath, which is an expanded metal stuff, on the shoulder structure in order for it to receive concrete. Then the concrete is applied by hand into the metal mesh, which builds up the surface itself. And that's basically what the whole shoulder neck portion is made of. It's built up concrete applied by hand over metal mesh. His ears are not really larger than anybody else. And I was very careful to get the exact scale of his ears in relation to his nose and all of the parts of his body. But how far to tilt them out was a question. So that had to be just right. Some people will say I didn't get them out far enough. They're not prominent enough. That may be. But they look right to me when we got them adjusted and then welded into place.
That's good. Go ahead.
Está bueno. Muy bien.
Good.
así. Dos fotos bien buenos en los dos. Nomás dos fotos que ya se mueva. Ahí está. Okay.
Well, when making the tie to get the knot and the right fold in, I brought one of my ties from the house, one I never use. It's a blue sort of satin tie. And I just used that to tie on him to see what the shape would look like, how it would fit the rest of his body. But the making of the tie has to be cast in concrete again. You can't do it like the body is made, where you apply concrete onto a metal lath by hand and get that shape. There's too much detail in the tie, so it has to be cast in a rubber mold, like the head itself. So I just did a big tie in styrofoam, because this is all monochromatic. You got to have some surface to the tie, otherwise it'll look absolutely blah. You can't tell what color or what shape. So I cut out little diamond shapes on those and stuck them all over the clay model of a blank tie. And then did a rubber mold of that. So his design has all the little diamond shapes on them, like polka dots. Once the concrete has been finished and scraped and ready to be painted, its color is a concrete gray. It has to be white. So we paint a primer on there first, which is very typical in any sort of concrete work. You paint a primer to seal the pores and so that the final coat won't soak in so much. Then the second coat was the final color, which is an ivory color, an off-white. We established that color years ago in all the other presidents, so that they're not so white that they gleam too much, and yet they're light enough to look a little bit like marble or stone. So we chose the same color for Obama as all the rest of them. Close. in Obama's case, it was a little bit different in that there's so little contrast in the shape of his skull and his hair, because his hair is so sharp that I wasn't getting a contrast between where the forehead stops and the hair begins. So I decided to try a stain, which was a light brown kind of application that would go into all the crevices of the hair. And then dry brush the white over that to get just a different look in the hair from the rest of the body, purely for questions of getting contrast. So you see where the forehead stops and the hair begins. So I did use that, and I had not used that on any of the others, where I tried to put a patina on there to change the basic color of them. Early on in his campaign, there's a very famous photograph of him standing with others, I think maybe Hillary Clinton, not having his hand over his heart, I believe it was, and not wearing a lapel pin. And he took a lot of criticism from that because it made him look not that patriotic. So he wore a lapel pin after that, and always did. I think he was never seen without one if he was wearing a coat. And so it was such an important issue in the campaign that I thought he should have one because he wears one all the time. So that's why he's wearing one. When we transported the Obama statue in two pieces on the same truck, the body itself is easy. It fits on a flatbed truck and there are ways of securing it. But the head is a real problem because the way it's cut off at the collar line, there's no way that you can make it stand up and stay there. So we had to construct a special structure that the head would fit on and weld into or be held by bolts so that it couldn't move around and travel. So that structure there we welded on to the truck itself because the truck had a steel bed on it. And it was easier to just weld it on rather than trying to hold it down with other means. We also had a couple of straps going through it just in case, a couple of nylon straps under tension. And the body itself was also welded on the corners, I think, with tension straps, just for double security. But all the heads have to have some sort of frame structure to ride on because there's no way they'll stand up by themselves.
Ahora falló el yello, güey. Que le levante más poquito, güey. Si mueve el yello. Espérate.
When the statue was secured on the truck and left the shop here, it was heading towards South Dakota to the President's Park near Mount Rushmore, near Lead, South Dakota, where it was erected and will remain forevermore. The head was lifted off by a crane and set into the neck where it's supposed to go and fitting in just where it was supposed to be, and then welded from the inside, and the seam around the neck filled in with concrete, and then the whole thing repainted to give the final sign-off version of it, which is where it is now. And this all happened in late June and early July, and it was really dedicated on July the 4th, 2009. Now, will I be around 8 years from now to do another one? Who knows? I'm 82 years old. I'll be 90 then. The probability is I will not want to do another one when I'm 90, if I'm even here, as I said. So this is the final chapter. It's like I was writing the great American novel and I finished it. That's sort of the comparison I'm making here. Because this whole project of doing all the presidents has been a huge project, and I feel an important one for the future, for kids, anybody studying American history, that the long story will be there visually, all these big heads. And each place where they're shown, there's a historical marker that goes along with each one to tie in the whole history of the presidency itself, how one related to the next one, and so forth. It's a continuous history of the United States that I participated in a small way of realizing for the general public to, it's a history lesson, is what it is, in art, and you can't do better than that.